what is thinging? So the cognitive archaeologist Malaforis, what a mouthful to start with, describes thinging as object making that scaffolds the ecologies of our minds, and that we have to make new things to understand the world around us better and engage with the world differently. He also describes it as a non-disciplinary form of object making, so I proudly identify as a thinger. Here you see a nascent thinger. Back then I just dig clay out of the cliff that I lived on, surrounded by the analog technologies that I lived with, which becomes relevant later. And I'm a thinger that makes leaky objects. What are leaky objects? So Tim Ingold, who's an ecological anthropologist, talks about objects never being passive, that they have two things. They have their materiality and their material culture, and they constantly leak those out into the world. So I have found that working with my traditional craft skills and kind of new technologies, I'm able to extend the leak and change maybe how we might engage with objects. So one of the first leaky objects I made, little trip back in history here, is a reworking of a Staffordshire flatback I did in 2011 when QR codes were quite new at the time. And I decided that this couple would no longer meet under a bough with a bushel of apples. They would meet on a dating app. So when you scanned the code, it took you through to their dating app online, the now defunct Match.com. And much as I liked bringing the fine qualities of fine china painting to an unsuspecting audience of, you know, singletons and cheaters, what I found was actually each code was individual, so I was able to track the objects as they went around the world. I was able to know when people were interacting with them, or if a museum put them back on exhibition. Through my analytics, I could figure this out. So I was thinking, oh, I've created trackable objects or interactive objects that allowed me to get feedback when they were in exhibition. So when you make work, and this is for the Indian Ceramics Triennial in 2018, and you make a body of work, you live with it for months, and then you go and set it up in a museum, and then you leave. And you never see that work probably for a year, 2 years, and you don't know if anyone's interacting with it. So using the materiality here of the conductivity of the gold luster and the translucency of the bone china, when somebody touches the object in India, it illuminates for them, but it simultaneously illuminates thousands of miles away in my house in Cardiff. So I know that they're interacting with it. And the really nice thing was I programmed this for like 30 seconds of interaction, but then I had to rewrite the code because people were touching it for in excess of 3 minutes, which really surprised me. And that's sort of really nice thing of kind of exploiting the materiality of something that you know really well. This was a piece called Shard. Just listen to that for a second. Which was for a European Creative Europe project in 2022. And as you touch the golden edges of the shard, it plays the sound that most ceramicists detest, the sound of smashing ceramics. But as you actually take that sound and extend it across time, it is really quite beautiful. And letting objects leak changes how you interact with them as well, because this object, which is, again, I don't know if you can hear that properly.
Well, that's a good one.
But this object is currently on show at the Glenvivian Gallery as part of the, just won the Wakelin Award. And it asks people to kind of hold it and touch with it, and you're rewarded with the sounds coming into harmony the longer that you stay, or the more people that you get to engage with the object. And in an environment where you're constantly asked not to touch things, it's quite a subversive piece. Now, something completely different. Going back to that original first image of me as a nascent thinger, recently I was talking to 800 16-year-olds, and so I used AI to generate the original image to show the arc of technology in my lifetime, basically. And what was really interesting is I gave the AI, I think it was DALL-E, a whole series of prompts, and in that it included the objects that I asked for, but it included objects that I didn't ask for. And I became obsessed with the objects that leaked into the environment because I knew what they were. And I looked at this one particularly and I was going, well, I know that. And anyone who grew up in Ireland in the 70s knew that because that sat on every mantelpiece, and that's the Child of Prague statue. So I became fascinated with what was leaking into AI. So I was recently asked to reinterpret a pair of Wally dogs from the British Folk Art Collection in Compton Verney. And I started thinking about, well, what would be the AI versions of these made this kind of people's art was the exhibition, and what would they be? So I started creating these AI pairings, and very interestingly, when you put all the data together, the average number of legs on a dog in AI is never 4. 3, 7, whatever, it's never 4. So I started working with these sort of strange objects that kind of leaked into spaces when you were putting in different sorts of prompts. So just opened this weekend at the National Centre for Glass in Sunderland is a world first, if only because it is so niche. It is an NFC-enabled, AI-informed, AR interactive Staffordshire flatback, which allows us to, and then I leak these objects back into the data stream. So they kind of, and the objects evolve. But being able to use more kind of historical data sets from the British Museum or the Louvre, I've started being able to get much more essence of the ceramic materiality through the digital artifacts, and those kind of hybrid worlds begin to connect. So I've always been a bit of a thinger, and I put this in for Steve because I couldn't leave it out. And this is over 10 years old now, but it was when my dad was 82 at the time, and he would never use any technology. He'd only use the landline, and you'd ring him and he'd say, oh, I'm about to go out for a game of golf. Oh, you shouldn't ring now. So I thought, I need to know he's up and about and he's safe, but he's about to sit down and have a cup of tea. So I put a heat sensor on his teapot, and when it went over 30 degrees, which it never happens in Ireland unless that's boiling water, it just sent a tweet to a Wemo switch, which turned my tea's maze on at the same time and made me a cup of tea, and I could ring him, and he'd go, that's great timing. And bless him, and he was so staunchly anti-tech. He went to his grave believing he'd never used the internet, even though he did all the time. One of the zenith of kind of leaky objects that I'm working on is the Cardiff Material Library. It's part of our carbon literacy project in CSAD. And you're all sitting here with different amounts of cobalt in or around your bodies. Maybe not in, very tiny bit in, but in your pockets or whatever. And most of you are probably aware that cobalt is on a raw critical list. Critical list of raw materials, and 90% of the cobalt in the world comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they do not have child labor laws in areas that are designated as having rare earth minerals. Now, hopefully, I'd be optimistically thinking that most of you have smartphones that might have urban mined cobalt in them, but wouldn't you like to know if they did or not? And so, in my pocket here, I have some cobalt from our material library, and if I scan that with my phone, it will, which I can show you on the next slide, which you can see in our lab, it will automatically bring you to the information about the cobalt, but about its carbon, about its culture, about its craft, how we use it, and about its creativity. And the joy of having this working with us is that the students can make ethical choices about the materials that they use at point of use. But it also, because we develop so many materials, they can embed those materials into the products that they make, which then go into the supply chain with that level of information. And it also means that we can archive the fantastic research that's going on in the school with the pigment library, our sustainable growing futures, and our sustainable darkroom. So we can, in a sense, hopefully bring that through into our supply chain. And here, this shirt that I'm wearing, I'm going to wrap up with this, is time's up. Yes, exactly, last slide. This is my shirt here is a submission from a second-year fashion student from the Material Library, and it shows, so with this shirt, I know how the dye was made, how it was printed, and Manish, the lovely man who stitched it. So my value on this shirt is very different to something I'm going to buy in H&M, isn't it? So if we actually understand, if our objects leak, we're going to treat them differently, we're going to consume less, and we're going to value those objects a hell of a lot more. So unstop the object is what I say. Thank you very much.